Welcome back, guys, to episode 4 of the Meta Matters podcast, the only podcast focusing on performance and coaching in esports. My name is Tyler Bond, and I'll be your host today. And I'm here with Matt, my wonderful co-host. And today we are joined by Jandro, a head coach that's worked with teams such as Misfits and Fnatic Rising. Thanks very much for coming along today, Jandro. How you doing, man? You all right?
Thank you guys for having me. It's a pleasure, and I think I'm sure that it's going to be an interesting talk.
Good, man. Absolutely. So, for those watching who maybe don't know who you are or what you've done in the past, do you want to give a brief overview about sort of your start into esports and how you kind of ended up where you are now?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Jandro. I have been now coaching League for around 6.5 years, maybe 7. I can't even remember exactly. For me, it was kind of a no-brainer, right? I come from traditional sports. Basketball has been one of my passions for the first half of my life, at least. I was really involved into coaching as well at the time, and I started coaching really sort of the very young people in the team that I was already playing at the time. And I figured out, yeah, this is really entertaining, and I feel like I can truly have an impact on some other people. And the moment that esports started to be more of a thing and I got into League, obviously I think everyone gets into this the same way, right? First you're a fan, you try the game out. Actually, I remember I didn't really like it a lot when I started playing League, but then I really got into it. And then I think it was kind of a really organic process in which it started as sort of a hobby with some friends that wanted to play. We won some amateur tournament, and another slightly bigger team in Spain contacted me if I was interested in coaching them. And of course, at some point, at the same time I was growing as a professional and as a coach, I felt like the Spanish scene was developing. So I kind of had to take the decision of, do I want to commit to this as a career? Do I want to invest my full time onto this? Or do I want to kind of drop it? Because it no longer was possible to actually do it kind of a split time thing. So yeah, I would say my very first big team or serious organization was Giants Gaming here in Spain. That I definitely, I definitely learned a lot with them, and I think it was kind of a big year in terms of both how the competition changed and how the entire scene of coaching professionalized in Spain. So I got the opportunity to work with them, and that obviously opened a lot of doors for me. From that point on, I worked with a couple of more national teams, and then I decided that it was time for me to go into Europe and try to actually have a shot at the big leagues and sort of live the whole experience of coaching outside of my country, outside of my comfort zone, because that was sort of a personal challenge for me. And initially, I got the opportunity to go working with Fnatic and leading their academy project. I spent the entire year working with them, and I felt like it was really honestly, it was a really, really nice experience, because I got the opportunity to see the inside of a big organization like Fnatic might be, but at the same time, sort of do it on the side of coaching that I was already really comfortable, and I had a bit more of an expertise that was developing rookies. And after a year that I will say was pretty successful for us from a competitive point of view, I got an offer from Misfits Gaming, and I spent the last year coaching for them on the LC.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
So you touched on it then a little bit, and Matt, this is probably your bag to talk about a lot, but basketball, man. Basketball seems to be a real running theme amongst a lot of the coaches we're talking to. I don't know if that's a coincidence, right? But Matt, your background's in basketball as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. I spent the better part of 10 years coaching at various levels, and a modest playing career. But I've spoken to League of Legends coaches in the past, and there seems to be similarities beyond just having 5 players involved. Is there can you see a similarity, or is there something that you think you can bring?
Yeah, this is actually a really recurrent topic in my experience, and I will say I don't know to what extent it's more about I'm obviously more comfortable with the setup of basketball, and I understand it in more depth, so I can see more parallelisms between that and League. But I will always put basketball as the example of the sport that I see more close to League in terms of what a traditional sport might be. And esports, of course, there's like huge differences still. But kind of this idea of everyone has a really specific role, but at the same time, everyone is involved in the whole process of how the team is supposed to move around and how the team is supposed to work. And sort of even the dynamics of how usually personality matches very commonly the role that you are playing. This is something that I definitely encountered myself when I was playing basketball, in which Obviously, this is a bit generalistic, but every player position has 1, 2, 3 personality traits that are really valuable because of the type of responsibilities that you are supposed to take on the role, but also that are very common to find. Clear example is you very, very often will find your support players being people that usually are caretakers, people that are going to be willing to bear responsibility beyond what is inside the game or inside the Rift. And you can definitely see some of this moving into basketball in some other positions. So for me, both in a more strategical aspect and in terms of how the environment and the atmosphere of a basketball team and a league team might be, there's a lot of things that I see in common.
Yeah, I also heard once, I was in a discussion and we thought that maybe the tanky champion is like having a big post player like Shaquille O'Neal. You know, he draws the defense and then leaves up people from outside.
Yeah, totally.
And then something else that struck me was
Simon's a new Shaq.
Yeah, exactly. It's like everyone has a ball. You know, it's just like basketball, but everyone has a ball because I suppose theoretically any champ could sort of score. Or Jandro, you mentioned that you were sort of scouted as a coach. Was there some particular attribute or quality that you had that made you a good candidate to be a coach?
Internally, I want to believe there was, but the reality of it is that I think it was purely result-based at the time. I don't think there was any depth on that scouting process. The next organization that was the one scouting me was also a completely amateur type of team. So it was more of like, oh, this guy just beat us, so we might as well ask if he wants to join us. So obviously, this strategy has worked on a much higher level to certain organizations and teams. But the reality is that it was much more of a simple, straightforward kind of suggestion than a in-depth scouting. And I believe it's actually extremely difficult to figure out how much value a coach, and not even only head coach, but in general, any piece of a staff can give from an external perspective. It's just way more difficult than with a player because you obviously don't have the same amount of material and information that you can consistently gather, and then you end up basing yourself entirely either on an interview process or on feedback from third parties. So I would say that this is one of the things that makes, in my opinion, much more difficult to hire the right staff for the organization than to get the right players for your team.
That's actually a really interesting point. This is a heavy topic to dive right in on, but let's go. You mentioned obviously that it's a lot harder to kind of get scouted as a coach. It's a lot harder to hire the right kind of coaching staff and support staff for teams. What is that? Is there a infrastructure that you think is needed in esports in general in order to allow people to grow as a coach and train to be a better coach? Or is that really a case of just kind of, you know, people need to just be baptized by fire almost and then see what works?
I think it's a bit of both, right? There is a little bit of this in traditional sports, and obviously they have been doing this for years and years. So obviously the processes are more refined, but the reality is that coaches themselves are usually very almost zealous about the way that they share their working paths and their secrets and their strategies. So obviously that doesn't put a lot of information out there for people to gather and be like, okay, this is what this guy can do or what this guy cannot do. So it comes down to having really strong hiring processes for the organizations. And the very first step on this is to have really clear what you want. And in my experience, this is one of the things that is lacking a lot, simply because since you don't have a way to evaluate how good a coach is, because there is not like as you said, there is not like a educational path to become an esports coach right now. Obviously, there is certain areas of education that you can have and definitely is going to add up to your coaching profile. But there's not like a really specific path of, oh, this guy, it's a coach in esports by Oxford College, so obviously he's going to be good because we know that they have these standards, right? That doesn't exist in esports right now. So the very first problem that you're going to find is that people applying for the same position might come from places in which that position involves really different responsibilities. So you're going to have to be able to, by your own means, have really clear what you're expecting from those professionals. It's very common that you have like, oh yeah, we need, for example, a performance coach. Great. What is this guy supposed to do? What are going to be the tasks that you're going to give this guy in order to make you better? How? Because this guy might be a great professional, but he might not be what you need, or you might not actually know what this guy can bring to the table. So I think there's obviously a development, and you see it on some of the top orgs on how much investment they put into having really strong hiring processes for the staff. But the balance kind of swaps on some other teams, and obviously I understand that rosters and players are extremely important, because not only are they going to be the guys playing for you, but they are also going to be the biggest asset in terms of marketing, in terms of branding. So it goes a step beyond coaching. And I think it's just definitely a work in progress, but I think the moment that how coaches become coaches is a much more standard process, it's going to become easier. And the moment in which teams take a step forward in how they structure their hiring processes, it's also going to become much easier for each coach to find the right fit for them, and the other way around.
That's really interesting. So, Matt, I mean, that's probably a really good point.
Yeah, let me in.
Let
me in.
Because that whole research base and academia and kind of, what is really needed to sort of succeed as a coach is completely, your passion area, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you're certainly preaching to the choir here, because I think that there is so much behind the scenes that we don't see, but there's also so much help that we can offer coaches to sort of develop the skills, not just the in-game knowledge. But I suppose let's ask the expert here, Jandro, if you compared, I mean, you were obviously the right candidate when you were scouted for the coaching position, because you've been a head coach for a while, and you've had a very successful career. So how have you developed? What does current Jandro now have that the starting, when you started out as a coach, perhaps wasn't so developed? What skills have you developed? How have you improved as a coach, would you say?
I think that's a deep question, that's for sure. And I think there is like two big changes, right? I feel like obviously there is a part that you are just gonna simply by continuously coach and work with players on a higher and higher and higher level, you are gonna develop a different kind of sense for the game, the way you understand what. It's interesting that the podcast is called Meta Matters, because the reality is that the longer you coach, you realize that meta matters, but there is another aspect of the game that doesn't change, and that if you actually get to understand and kind of develop your not only your understanding, but the way you can really focus on certain areas of the game and make sure that every team that you work on have certain fundamentals really clear, that they are always going to be able to execute on that. And that strategic part, it's the one that I think no one can really help you right now, okay? You're going to have like a lot of media content, a lot of videos, a lot of examples, a lot of games, interviews. Of course, there is material out there, but there is no other way that actually sitting down, studying the game, because there is not like a league for dummies. That doesn't exist right now, right? You cannot like go find a book and try to read. If you want to learn about chess, for example, that is a big topic lately, you have hundreds and thousands of books about every specific movement, how people might react to it, what are the risks, what are the advantages that you might be taking, to the point that it becomes a really systematic process. There has been attempts to do this on League, but it's such an adaptable and fast game that the only way to do it is to actually invest a big amount of your time on developing sort of an instinct for the game that is going to allow you to pick up on those changes really fast. And this is something that it's a shared skill with players to a certain extent. But there is obviously this other huge side that in the past was way less valued, but every time it's becoming bigger and bigger, and people are beginning to understand that this is what actually usually makes the difference when it comes to the really high-level organizations. And it's all the human resources part, all the how you're going to manage a group of people and try to find this balance between pushing them out of their comfort zone, but at the same time creating an atmosphere in which people are going to be happy working, they are going to feel that they have a support structure around them. And the reality of that is that I think then there is different paths to that, right? Obviously, I think there is school professional formation that can help you, because obviously esports coaching is a new thing, but coaching is not a new thing. Coaching is something that has existed and has been around for a while, and there are true experts that have not only a background of experience, but also a background of scholarship and understanding of the theory of it. So obviously, in that sense, you're going to have a lot more of resources and reference that you can go check up, and you can go and try to get a better sense of that knowledge for yourself. And trying to find that balance, in my opinion, between being able to speak the same language that your players are going to be talking, so they can find this kind of common ground and build a relationship of trust and respect through that. But at the same time, keeping yourself on the higher ground, that you are aware of what the group needs and how the group needs to be developing, because you have a different set of skills and knowledge that kind of allows you to see the big picture and how different personalities and different people are going to add into that mixture, is what I believe differentiates coaches that are less experienced and people who have actually, as you mentioned before, kind of have gone through a trial of fire and have to deal with a difficult situation. Because the reality is that I don't think almost any esports coach was prepared for that when they started, and that's a problem, right? Because the issue of this learning process is that it's very, very likely that coach A, coach B, and coach C over 5 years of experience are going to come to really different conclusions, and they are not going to have a way to compare and match those conclusions. So 5 years from now, when coach D faces the same situation, he's going to have to learn again by his own process, rather than being able to look up to those 3 opportunities and see, oh, some people already face this problem, and those were the 3 viable solutions that they found to it.
That's really interesting. Matt, any thoughts?
Perhaps we can try and summarize, because that was, I mean, I feel like...
Sorry, I went on a long rant there.
No, it's great. I'm at coaching university here. This is wonderful. So, so instincts for the game, because it's hard to sort of learn a playbook that will be relevant across all the new patches and updates. Some skills and human resources management, being able to use a support structure and build a support structure within the team, speaking the language of the players, but also making sure that you're seeing the bigger picture. Those are sort of attributes that will benefit you as a coach in League of Legends. That's roughly?
Yeah, if I can give you a really summarized version, I think it's about game knowledge, about understanding the whole structure of the team, not just the 5 players that you have in front of you. Being able to acknowledge the fact that player personalities and how they mix between them is going to be the key factor between succeeding or failing, sort of this magnifying glass that happens in a team, in a competition, and being able to surround yourself with a support structure that is going to work for the team and that is going to have a clear function, that is going to work in the whole big picture that we were speaking before.
What do you mean by the support structure? Is that sort of your support staff? Like, so having a performance coach, a sports psychologist, dietitian, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think it goes, it really depends obviously on the possibilities of the team that you are working on. Obviously not everyone has the same resources and not everyone is able to do the same type of investment, but I think it goes from the very beginning of the CEO and the high directives on the club that need to be aligned with the vision and with the if you're going to be pushing for a culture needs to start from the very top, right? If it doesn't, the reality is that it's going to be a mixed message, and down the line at some point it's going to break. So when I'm talking about the support structure, I'm talking about that everyone that is involved and surround the team and the head coach needs to be aligned with the vision of what is the goals and how are we going to get there, that the head coach should be giving you guidelines to follow. So that goes into the chef, that goes into nutritionist, it can be a psychologist, it can be an analyst, and I don't want to specify because I think different teams and different coaches are going to have higher priorities for different specific people in that support structure. But I think having one around you and not sort of this head coach does it all and team is one thing and the club is another thing, it's super important.
Wow, fantastic.
Dude, really insightful, absolutely. I'd almost like to sort of pull you back a little bit. Let's kind of go back in time a little bit and maybe talk about some of your experiences coaching and see a little bit what you think of these coaching experiences after sort of reflecting on them for a few years, right? So you coached a 10-man roster while working for
I did.
Movistars, right?
Yeah.
That must have been rough, man. That must have been a tough situation. That must have been a tough situation to deal with 10 individuals like that, right? Like, can you talk about some of your experiences there?
Yeah, of course. I think something that, in my opinion, makes you a better coach is if after every year of coaching, you don't look back and you can think, oh yeah, I definitely did this wrong, or that definitely was a mistake. You're not going to be able to be reflective, and then it's much harder to actually improve. And I think that 10-man roster was definitely a great example of that, right? I think this project started with Movistar writers. Taylor, who was coach for Fnatic, one of the most successful coaches in Europe, had this vision of, okay, one of the issues that there is in esports is you don't have really powerful structures from the top down in both staff and teams. So players do have a lot of power over the team and over the club because substitute players are not a real thing. So at some point, you actually can get kind of hijacked by a player in the entire project, the entire goals, and an entire team. Because the reality of League of Legends is that no longer one single player can carry a team, but one single player can make a team completely boom, right? It can make them not be able to win or perform or train or anything. So the idea behind this 10-man roster was kind of, and I think every 10-man roster was to take away some of that power from the players and bring it back to the staff in a way that you have two people who are actually competitive players in the fighting for the same spot in a way that they can help each other, but at the same time they can compete with each other and sort of create a ground of you cannot get too comfortable, you cannot get too lazy because there's going to be someone that is going to be fighting to get on your spot. And I think on theory and on paper, there is a lot of things that are correct and they're right. For example, obviously for riders, it was a difficult season because one of the very first things that you realize is that having 10 players does not make you having twice the same problems as having 5 players, but it actually brings new and different player problems to the table. And one of the issues that we had, because obviously I think this 10-man roster is not so different from having an academy team and an LEC team that are that are working closer or that are kind of in the same office, in the same building, whatever is the setup that your team has. But for us, this second team did not compete anywhere else. So you had 5 players that were kind of sitting there, obviously practicing, and they had their whole days planned. But the reality is, at the end of the day, some people will compete and some people will not. And the moment that some of these roles were a bit more established, some people will tend to lose that motivation, and some people will create conflict between both players on the same position. And I think there is 2 fundamental problems here. The very first one, it goes back to esports and the difference with traditional sports. I don't think people have really deep values about how a team is supposed to work and what being part of a team means. And I think it's normal, right? Because if you look at a traditional sports player career, 99% of the cases they are going to start playing from very, very young ages. And uh, I will guarantee you that almost every single team is going to be working with those very young players, and they are not going to be teaching them about how important it is to make a 3-pointer or how to do this type of defense or how to do that. They're going to be teaching them about the team is bigger than yourself. Your teammates are what matters. This is not only about winning. This is about learning. This is about this. This is about that. And they're going to be introducing certain values that are going to be hitting the core of who you are as a person, because they are arriving at you at a very young age, and you're going to be able to bring that when you are at high stress, high pressure levels. And that sort of, it's going to be the backline of how a team operates and how people will understand. And that doesn't really translate to esports, right? That doesn't exist right now because of the way the industry works and the way the teams operate. So obviously, it's much more difficult to learn this as an adult that is already kind of struggling for their own careers and for their own professional. And all of a sudden, it's not kind of a kids game. It's more of like your total life and everything that you're putting. So I felt like we were not ready as a staff to handle that situation because it was definitely a first attempt. The players did not understand towards where we wanted to go. And while there was obviously a lot of really fun and good memories from that year, and I think we actually didn't have a terrible performance. I think we finished second in the league or third that year. I don't remember right now. It was definitely a big learning experience. Yeah.
I bet. And also, I mean, it draws you're right in saying there's no sort of structures, there's no guidelines about how to work with that in League of Legends, and also it introduces, like you say, new pressures, new stresses, because like one of the biggest sources of stress you read about in traditional sports is selection pressure. So having to choose who to play, who to drop, who to give more minutes to, and that's a tremendous source of stress for a lot of coaches. So you're introducing that new source of stress. Would you go back to it? Would you use that system in the future?
I mean, this is sort of something that the Misfits we try to have with having our academy really close. And I'm really a big advocate for the importance of academy programs and having your academy team not be a completely separated team from your main team, but actually include them, because very often your academy players are going to be much more coachable, right? They understand that they are looking for that opportunity. They are going to be willing to do much more for that opportunity, and that definitely serves as a motivational source for the players on the main team, and it can also give you fundamentally strategic advantages, right? Like there is, outside of like the human values, there is still more value to having an academy program and to have it really close to your main team. So I would say, yeah, I will definitely do it with small twists, but I think it's the way to go.
That's a really nice segue. Let's talk about academy systems then, right? So your experience obviously with Fnatic Rising, that was completely dominant. That was, Fnatic Rising and the seasons that you were with them was fantastic. They have performed extremely well. Do you want to sort of reflect on your experience there? What went right? What were you guys doing to make that performance so impactful?
So I think the very first and obvious thing is that I'm being realistic. We had everything to win, right? We had a really strong roster, a really strong team behind the roster. And the reality is that at the moment where we joined at the time, I think it was called UKLC, the average level of the team was really low compared to some other regions. So I think in that sense, and to say it simple, I don't think they were ready for us. I think they were not ready to face a team that was actually 100 professional team with players that were really driven and with sort of this support structure that we were talking before. And the results instantly show, right? We had a lot of raw talent. We have players that were really close to some of the LEC level. And the proof of that is that we spent the entire year screaming versus Fnatic, and we definitely helped them out and tried to understand better their weaknesses and how they could be exploited. I got lucky in a sense of having a lot of talent to work with, but I think a lot of the success from that year comes from how much of a great team atmosphere that we managed to create, in which people were actually really try hard and they were really committed to let's make something else that just win UK, and to a certain extent having a low bar in terms of domestic challenge, because other than Excel Academy at the season, there was not like a lot of direct competition for the team. Kind of motivate them to see that just playing versus these teams and winning versus this team was not going to be enough to take them where they wanted to be, and sort of having this really clear internal goal as a team made everyone be really driven to success, and in general it was really nice to work with them.
Yeah, so it was really, I mean, this is going to probably go down quite badly in some places, but that whole season it was you guys and Excel, right? There pretty much wasn't really another competitor to kind of match you guys at all. Would you say?
I would say the format, just to, I don't want to flame some of the other teams. I would say the format really did not help them, because they decided to implement some of a sort of a king of the hill kind of system. And obviously, the moment that the only way to score points in the league every week was to eventually beat either Fnatic or Excel, made it really difficult. Imagine an LEC in which every week you need to either beat G2 or Fnatic in order to actually have, I'm sure that they could get few points, but realistic points that could make you into having a final or to actually fight for the championship. It's so hard to develop that way, because at the end, you're going to just keep fighting against the same wall that is not on a level that you can reach right now. So I think it was a really unfortunate system in terms of how the league operated that season for the developing of some of those worst teams, But obviously, they just wanted Fnatic and Excel to be on the stream every time because obviously it was. I mean, it's
two headliners, right? So okay, then is it the UK scene which is falling behind in terms of quality of like players and teams, or was it the structure of the tournament that held people back?
I mean, I think there was a bit of both, right? I think UKLC was really an undeveloped scene. Right before that, I think there was almost no full-time teams. There was players that were like kind of studying while playing, or that the money in there was also not enough for them to commit to a full-time job. So obviously that makes it much more difficult, right? And at the end, you're gonna have your national players. You need to have always your 3 UK players at the time. I don't know if it changed. I don't know, now it's not the same because it mixed it with the Nordic League, but I think it was the right decision. But obviously, one side was, yeah, we are kind of an amateur scene, and all of a sudden we are facing these 2 teams that are not amateur at all. They come from like a big background of success in different ways, and they are deciding that if they are going to be playing in this league, is obviously to take it. So they obviously make bigger investments in terms of money. They import players that they could access. They could compete with any other top ERL team. Meanwhile, every other UK team had a really hard time, both in terms of investment and in terms of name, brand, whatever you want to call it, to actually be able to gather some of that really high-profile talent from other national leagues.
And also, the big players want to work with you, Jandro. So I mean,
absolutely, you're the key.
Yeah, definitely. Fnatic did not help at all.
Yeah, I really like what you were saying there about having something else than just winning in place. So, of course, it helps having the incentive of maybe a main team to break into, but also just envisioning sort of a year in an academy team as a year to develop and improve. And maybe on a related note, did you, when you were in that academy environment, did you also think of your own development and how you can improve and where you wanted to go? And is that easy to do as a coach? Is it easy to sort of develop yourself, improve your skills?
So answering the first part of the question, absolutely. One of the biggest factors for me to go into Fnatic Academy is that I made sure when I joined that this was a possibility, is that I was going to have access to the way the main team was working. I was spamming poor Joey John back every day on Discord. We were chatting about things. I had a really close relationship with Misfits as well. That was the strategic coach at the time. I tried to figure out, okay, these guys are up here right now, I'm below them. So what is the difference here? What are they doing that I'm not? What am I doing that they might not be doing? How can I implement things that might be successful? And how can I take away from them a piece of that knowledge and actually make sure that in the next team that I join, or even on this team, I get the opportunity to test it and to adapt it to the way that I coach already. So obviously that was a huge factor for me, right? And I think since we were going back to this lack of clear path towards formation and towards education as a coach, if you look back a bit into ancient history, before there is a structured way of having a scholarship, a college, whatever, what is the model that people are doing in order to learn a profession, in order to learn a craft? You end up trying to look for a master, right? You're going to look for someone who has already developed the ability to do that craft, and you're going to try to either imitate or adapt some of that knowledge into what you can do. I think there's a lot of that in coaching in esports right now. And obviously having the opportunity to work under big professionals and people that have experienced some of these trial of fires that we were talking before can be a highway towards learning much more fast some of these processes. And for me, it has been vital, right? When I was working in Giants, I had the opportunity to meet Lothar, who was at the time the coach for the LCS team. When I was in Riders, I got the opportunity to work with Daylor, for example, that definitely opened my mind to a lot of different concepts and a different understanding of what coaching might be. When I was in Fnatic, I obviously had the opportunity, as I said, to work with Joey and to get to learn from people that I respected as professionals. And I will definitely say that I tried to add a piece of every single one of them into how I think I should be coaching. Sometimes entirely copying the way that they would do something and adding it to the process, and sometimes just by comparison, trying to modify some of the things that I might be doing.
I think that's part of the skill of coaching, isn't it? Because you're not reinventing the wheel. There have been other coaches, but it's combining what has been done, what works with your own style as well. Could you describe just briefly what is your way? What is there something distinct about how you coach? Is there something you like to be known for?
So for me, I think there is two things that I always talk about with teams. I think it's all about structure and atmosphere. So sorry, you can call it culture, you can call it team, whatever you want. So structure is about, I think one of the huge issues I have with a lot of organizations is that there is so many random things happening and things that you either don't have a feedback loop to know how it's going to affect the team or to know how it's going to have an impact on what you are doing. You don't have a clear idea of why are you actually doing this. Very often you just kind of are putting down fires in front of you instead of actually having a plan and be able to try to follow it. So for me, this is one of the things that I wanted to be really a change, and I wanted to do in a different way, and is have a really clear map of processes and have really clear every single aspect that is going to have an influence on the team, and how can we evaluate it, how can we track its progress, and how can we continuously improve it and optimize it. So I think this side of process optimizations is one of the things that I think it really defines me as a coach. On the other side is I think there is a lot of value in culture, right? There is a lot of value on living by the same code and by the same creed and trying to understand a common set of goals, but also sort of a whole way of thinking and living as a team and creating this common ground for them from the very basic or small rituals and small actual physical things that are going to connect you to those values to the very first step of actually fleshing out those ideas and actually discussing what is important for your team and try to put the words that sometimes they might have the ideas, but they are having a harder time explaining those things and actually vocalizing it. It's definitely the other side of how I would define myself as a coach.
Fantastic.
It's really interesting, dude. Honestly, I'm really enjoying this chat. I guess let's kind of fast forward again. Let's kind of leave the past behind. Let's talk about Misfits this year, if you're happy to. So obviously Spring Split went really well. You guys, finished sort of mid to top table. Summer Split was a lot harder. There was kind of in between the bottom 5 teams, there was 3 games, maybe. That was a really tough split, and Misfits didn't perform as well. I think that's fair to say. Have you got any reflections on Misfits' performance this year in general? Kind of any kind of looking back, anything you would do differently? I'd love to know a bit about the sort of inner workings of an LEC team in that situation.
Yeah, of course. So first thing is I believe that there is I don't think Misfits was so good in the spring, and it was neither so bad in summer in a sense of like the actual level of the team. Obviously, if you go check into the results, it's clearly that we had a much better run on spring than summer. And I think this was actually part of the issue. I think at some point we won 7 best of ones in a row, and internally something changed, and we believed that we were the best team on the world and that we were the second coming of Faker and that we could actually do whatever we want. And that was not the reality, right? We were a team that had some lack on best of ones, that had a really smart understanding of the meta in a specific couple of patches, and we were fast adapting. But there was still a lot of fundamental problems on how we operated, on how we play certain aspects of the game, and our communication system was also not the best. So obviously, this translated into summer, and we made changes to the roster that while it might have offered a different set of skills, and some of those players brought a lot of value in a different way. Obviously, it puts you a step back in terms of going back and having to work on having to develop some of those processes, communication systems, etc., that you had already put into place in spring. So in a sense, we kind of rebuilt too much and ended up having 2 spring splits, let's say, and one was more successful than the other. So obviously that was an issue, and I think the second part of the problem was I think we had a misconception, or from the organization point of side, in general, we really quickly changed from this is a long-term 2-year kind of development project to, wait, holy shit, we can actually win games. Maybe this should be a short-term project and we should be going to Worlds right now, without actually being able to address some of the problems that stayed there from the very beginning and never got fundamentally fixed. So we kind of kept going, and there was 2 specific moments that were really defining on summer. There were back-to-back games versus Fnatic in which we had a really immense goal lead. We throw both games. I think both times were around 10k goal lead, something that doesn't happen, right? Statistically, you're going to lose 2-3% of those games. And going back after half of the split and losing the same game again in summer definitely took a toll mentally for everyone. And it felt like, okay, what are we actually doing? Because we kind of had the same issues that we were having half a split ago, and we have not shown that we are able to fix them. And I think at some point, people lost a bit of faith after that on that those problems were going to be able to be fixed right there. And I think obviously the whole context of the situation made it a bit more difficult. So I would say that those 2 things were like the bigger factors.
And this keeps coming up again and again, Matt. There's this horrible white light that just appeared behind my head. I hope
It keeps coming up again and again.
This is something that comes up again and again, right? I'm pretty sure every podcast we've had so far, this has come up. This kind of short-termed nature of esports, and the fact that you don't really get chance as a coach or even as a player really to grow as a team, to sort of learn each other, because people get swapped out, rosters change, things happen really, really, really quickly, and it's so rare to have a longer term plan, as you said. Is that a factor in more teams not being able to succeed? Maybe you guys or what?
I think it's clear that teams who have bet on long term and actually stick to it, because I think it's really easy, and every single organization I have met and interview with, no one tells you, oh, this is a short term, we just want to win right now, and if we don't win right now, that's it, we are going to change everyone. No one opens with that, right? Everyone has big plans about developing, big plans about long term, but the reality is that there's other pressures and other factors that play into account, both economically, both in terms of how internally the teams operate. And obviously, it goes back to one of the problems that we were speaking right at the beginning of the podcast, that is, if you do not have a really strong, clear hiring process, you might end up with someone that it was not what you think it will be, and it's not the right fit for what you want to build. So all of a sudden, going for long term with this person, it might not be the right idea. But then you're going to go back into the market without actually fixing those hiring processes. So you are very likely to repeat the same mistake and end up having over and over and over the same stories. So I feel like that's a side of it. Obviously, it's also hard to go on long term, right? As we were speaking, if you are losing, you're investing a lot of money. It's already unclear how much profitable it's going to be, the investment onto the esport, into league, blah, blah, blah. If you add failure to that and you kind of keep selling the idea of a longer term, it can become problematic. So I think you kind of need to find the middle term and go for what is best for the organization at the time. I'm obviously, in many situations, I advocate for long-term development because I think it's a much more reliable and consistent way to achieve wins, not only right now, but over the course of years. But the truth behind it is that not every team and not every organization can bet for long-term. Sometimes it's just not doable. And I think the key there is to have clear-cut honesty about what you are looking for and what you are going to do. Because the way you want to coach and the way you want to play with a team that is built towards winning right now and nothing else is different than the way that you are going to invest time and try to develop a team that is more of a long-term kind of project. Because maybe, and to put it into a really simple example, if you have Team A and Team A is built towards succeeding right now, and that's it, because we need like a punch, we need a big brand breakthrough, you are going to focus a lot on being the best of the meta and really specific best of one kind of things. What are the most urgent problems that you have in the team and that you need to fix? And that is something that is not fundamentally bad or wrong. It's just a different style and a different approach. Meanwhile, if maybe you have Team B that is built towards, okay, we want to have a second year summer split that is going to be super successful, then you might invest much more time into developing a really strong team culture, into developing a winning culture, and you might invest a lot of more time into things outside of the game, like a really good nutrition program, a really good help from a psychologist staff, gym, physical activity, and these are just examples, of course, a lot of other things that are probably not going to give you a short-term great improvement. They might not be making you better right now, but they are planting the seeds towards you being able to be great in a few years or in a year.
Absolutely.
Actually,
It's really interesting.
Yeah, I read some organizational research about how the biggest impact that you can have on team performance, and they actually said it accounts for 60% of the impact on team performance, is putting in place structures before the team is even formed. So having a clear idea of roles, having role awareness, clarity with respect to the vision, who does what, having that all in place accounts for about 60% of ultimate team performance, and then 30% is the launch of that. So when all the members are in place, making sure everyone gets it, everyone's on board with that, and then 10% is sort of like during the process, coming in and playing around with the team dynamics, communication, putting out fires, as you say, a little bit of conflict resolution. So that's really interesting to hear you say it, because it's also a challenge for sort of performance coaches and for sports psychologists, because if they come in too late to sort of psychologically inform the various areas of sort of building a team, it can have issues, I think. So yeah, really interesting to hear you say that.
And like from a consumer point of view, I suppose, because I'm the least qualified here, I don't think we've seen enough teams, especially in the ADC, give that long-term structure a chance. Really, you said that Misfits had a 2-year plan, but then kind of scrapped it after one split. Is that something you've seen in other LEC teams, kind of from the sideline as well, or not?
I mean, obviously, I don't know exactly how every team operates from the inside, and I don't even want to say that Misfits like completely scrap it, right? It's more of like really making change short term that doesn't really adapt to what you want to be in the long term. And I'm convinced that this happens a lot to teams, right? At the end, you're going to spot opportunities that are going to have a really short period of time that you might take, like players or free agencies or things like this. And we go back to the same, right? And I think something that Matt mentions is really important. If you don't have those structures put in place right before this, like way before you actually start hiring people, most likely what is going to happen is that you're going to have 2-3 weeks, 1 month at best between your hiring your coaching staff and your hiring your roster. So you're going to have to be making use of that time in a really efficient way if you are expecting that to actually last and to be well enough planned for it to overcome no matter what type of roster you end up having. So I think that happens very often, right? I think there are organizations like obviously G2. I think Excel is a good example of an organization that have invested a lot into trying to build something sustainable and something towards the long term. And there are clearly a lot of efforts made from almost every organization in transforming into a much more sustainable org towards that. Obviously, how much successful some of these organizations have been putting this mechanism into place, then you have a lot of difference, right, between one and others. And I think there is obviously examples of organizations that have tried to consistently rebuild betting on short term and consistently fail at it.
Absolutely.
Very eloquently put as well. Really impressed with like how clear you are on those points, and certainly I think they're also really important. This has been a deep dive into some heavy performance related issues. It's fantastic. I suppose we had a few other questions about how you stay up to date as a coach. So like we talk about the meta changing, new champions are released.
Meta Matters podcast.
Meta Matters. We have to get into the Meta Matters, exactly. So how do you as a coach stay up to date? Because I mean, I suppose from outside of the sort of professional scene, you might think that just playing is a good way of staying up to date, but it's probably not the best use of your time as a coach. So how do you learn about the changes and stay current?
Okay, so obviously, and I think playing is one of those things that has generated a lot of debate around it. I think it's entirely depending of your actual skill level at the game. I think if obviously you are LS and you are a high Korean challenger coach, your input on how you are playing is really gonna correlate to the way your players might be playing those same situations. So you can extract correct or proper conclusions out of that and add them to your understanding of the game. But if you are just not good enough, right? And I'm talking about the 1% of coaches that are going to be good enough to actually play the game. Coaching might be a really misleading way of adding things into how you understand it strategically, because the way that you are executing on a certain champion, on a certain object, on a certain way of playing the game might not correlate to the type of pressure that the same matchup, the same scenario might be having on a professional level from a top tier player. So I think personally for me, playing is not as useful. Obviously, there are things, right? You're going to go into the practice tool and you're going to check some numbers and you're going to be executing some things. And for example, now you have the precision. There's so many items that just to develop this eye for the game and this instinct. So things you don't need to be consciously thinking about them. They just pop on your head. Playing is a useful skill. But to me, watching and analyzing, it's one of the best and most useful skills. I think first you need to develop the right way to do it. I'm convinced that there is people, because I obviously get a lot of messages, right, from people either trying to get into coaching or trying to understand a bit better the game, that spend hours and hours and hours watching the game, but they actually are not able to analyze it the way that they can extract some ideas that are useful and some things that are systematically going to happen one game after another, that at the end, that's kind of what you're looking, right? You're looking for things that are going to repeat so you can actually be ahead of them and you can actually predict them. So I think you need to be able to develop the right way for you to extract information from games that you are watching and try to create a model that works for you, in which you kind of find this repeating things that you are actually going to be able to work from there. And second, I think obviously this is a bit more hard for people who are just getting into coaching, but once you get there, the biggest by far source of knowledge that you're going to have about the game are your players. There are people that are extremely dedicated to playing the game, that they are extremely talented at playing the game, and very more often than not, they actually are huge libraries of knowledge about the game and about the role. Simply, they are usually not that good at putting that knowledge into words, because for them it's much more of a muscle reflection kind of thing that they do automatically without having to think consciously about what they're doing. But if you sit down with them, you give them the tools to put that information into words or to put that information into a format that you can understand yourself. I found that speaking to your players, sitting down and actually listen to how they understand the game and how they view it is by far the most useful tool that you have in order to keep yourself updated with the game.
Brilliant.
Absolutely. So I guess a question that leads on from that then, right? How important is game-specific knowledge in coaching compared to knowing how to coach?
I would say it depends on the level. Like, obviously it's important, right? And I think if you are coaching at the highest level, the very top level, you need a bit of everything, and you need an expert on every aspect. You need someone who is going to be having really clear how to handle a group, that how to coach that group, conflict resolution, all the human aspect of coaching. And you're going to need either the same guy or someone else that obviously it's going to be able to create debate and argue and discuss with the players on a similar level about the game, because that's the way to kind of move the conversation forward and to force them to actually keep asking the right questions. I think as you go lower on the level of the team, usually you are going to want to have someone that is versatile, that has a strong game knowledge, because more often than not, players outside of the LEC or national leagues, what they are lacking is some of the fundamentals of the games, and have them like really drilled to the point that they are automatic, so they can fully focus when they are in game about the team stuff, because everything that is individual kind of goes on their own. So I will say it's a balance between both. I think each team has a preference towards one. To put you two examples, if I have a team full of rookies that is going to be extremely easy to coach, they are going to listen to everything, I probably don't need someone who is going to be really strong leadership figure and it's going to have really good negotiating skills. But I'm going to need someone who is really good at explaining himself and someone who has deep and clear understanding on what is important on the game, so he can translate that knowledge to my rookies. But if I have a roster with strong veteran personalities, I probably, even if I teach them a lot, the reality is that the more you play the game, the more fixated on your own way to play the game that you are usually are. But also the more relevant that it becomes to have someone who can lead that group and handle the conversation in ways that each teammate is helpful towards each other rather than being harmful towards each other. Because as we were saying before, right, that league knowledge is most likely going to be there in the team, in the players. A great example for me of that was Taylor. Taylor is someone who, obviously, when he was in Fnatic, he knew about the game, right? He was updating himself. But when he came coaching to Riders, he actually didn't know much about the game in terms of specific knowledge about the meta, about the execution of certain things. He had the fundamentals clear because they had not changed, but he was really smart about moving the conversation with the right questions. And he clearly showcased that the knowledge of those players was already there. They just didn't know how to put it in a way that was a common language for everyone on the team, and that we could actually build from that. And the moment that you figure out that, and that you start asking the right questions, you start realizing that you don't need that much knowledge, other than obviously it's useful, right, in a different way, but to actually handle the team.
Dude,
Brilliant.
That leads on as well so well to my next question, right? You know, the big sort of news this week is Doublelift retiring, right? Obviously, earlier on this year, like Bjergsen is moving to a coaching role for TSM as well. I mean, you've just said it exactly kind of where I wanted to be leading you a little bit. How do you feel about ex-professional players transitioning to coaching?
I think there's a misconception that just for being a really good player, you are going to translate into a really good coach.
Are
and
you
that's
reading
extreme.
my script? That's literally the next question, dude.
This is just clearly a false statement. There is an overlapping of certain sets of skills that are obviously useful. I mean, if you are Jersen, you obviously have so much knowledge about the game that you definitely are going to be able to get a use out of that knowledge. Now, does Jersen have the set of the skills that is going to allow, and I'm using Jersen example purely theoretically, I have no clue about, I'm not judging how his ability as a coach might be. Are you going to have the set of the skills that is going to allow, it's going to allow you to put that knowledge into the minds of some of those players that you're going to be working with them? Or you are going to just be fixated on the way you understand the game? And since you have not been forced to deal with other people knowing more than you about the game, you might be a bit more close-minded. Obviously, there are great examples, right? I think you learn a lot about how a team operates by being on a team. So obviously, if you have been playing for years and years and years, you probably have had a lot of good coaches, a lot of good teammates. And if you were smart and you just pick up small bits of information from each of those people and implement it on the way that you want to work, you can become a great coach. And there's obviously sort of an advantage that you have as an ex-pro to become a coach, but that doesn't mean that it's an automatic process. You obviously are going to have to re-educate yourself, change the way you work. And I think, on my experience, the most common issue that they sometimes might face is all of a sudden you are in a team, but you cannot behave and operate as a player because you are not, and players are not going to look at you as a teammate. They are going to look at you as a coach. So you are going to have to understand that what you say and how you say it and the impact that some of your words might have. And I think that's like a really different skill set that being a teammate, because when you're on the same level, you can do whatever you want, right? Obviously, there are certain barriers that you cannot cross, but there's much more freedom about how can you behave and how can you talk to other people, and the bond and trust relations is really different than between a coach and a player. So I will say that there is obviously, as we said, correlation, and some skills can translate, but I don't think being a player automatically makes you a coach, and thinking that way probably makes you a bad coach.
It's like the sort of model you just described of having three areas: the game knowledge, the human aspect, and then the aspect of just being a sort of a master moderator, so to speak. So to be able to engage people in debate and facilitate good discussion and avoid conflict or resolve conflict. So Yeah, fascinating insights. I thoroughly agree with everything that you're saying, and it strikes me that we're probably, well, maybe more you than us, but we're writing here the League of Legends Coaching for Dummies book that we said was missing at the beginning. I think it's all
Great. I think that's really needed.
Yeah.
So obviously that's probably a really good point to sort of wrap up the podcast. So I've got a couple of questions I'd love to sort of ask you to sort of showcase exactly your skill set, exactly where it is you want to be going in the future, and kind of talk a little bit more about kind of you really. And then Matt, unless you've got any other big topics, we can sort of think about wrapping stuff up.
No, we should certainly put the spotlight back on you, Jandro, because it's been a real pleasure.
The experience has been invaluable today. So let's talk about you again, right? So what are some of the kind of coaches or teams, indeed, in the LEC, the LCS, wherever, that you sort of admire and look up to?
So obviously some of those names I already mentioned them, right? I think John Buck is someone that I met earlier in my career, and it was extremely helpful, both directly and indirectly, in terms of seeing the way they did certain things. So definitely big recommendation there. I think if you're looking a bit more from a strategic point of view, I think Peter Dunn is probably, if not the biggest, one of the biggest experts in League from coaching perspective. I got the pleasure to speak with him and to see him coaching directly some players. And obviously, his level is really from another world, right? This guy has really strong micro understanding of really specific aspects of the game that are hard to get. And then I don't know him personally, and I obviously have not clear insight of how it operates from the inside. But looking at the mixture and how the group looks from the outside, I feel like definitely someone that goes underrated in terms of conflict resolution is definitely Grabs from G2. If you look at that team, they always seems to be on the edge between having fun and being the most try-hard team that you can see. And I think finding that balance, it's really the right way to handle a group of people who have already strong personalities and have already succeed on the business in a way. So there's definitely like great examples, right? Both in esports and outside of esports. To any coach out there, I will definitely recommend to go and read about some of the very best coaches in basketball that there is out there, right? Everyone knows Phil Jackson, everyone knows Greg Popovich. Those people are known by everyone for a reason. So take your time and go out of your way and not only like focus on esports coaching, but actually realize that there is people who have been coaching for hundreds of years on traditional sports, and you can find examples in every sport in every country. So I think there's so many great examples of coaching leaders.
Absolutely. So then, lastly, but certainly not least, what are you sort of looking to achieve next? Where are you kind of eyeing up going? Is it back to traditional sports? Do you want to stay in esports? What's your next move?
For now, I want to stay in esports. This has not been the nicest or easiest of season for me. I think I came into the market understandably with not the best value. Obviously, we didn't have the best split in summer, as we were mentioning. So right now, in conversation with multiple teams and trying to figure out a project that fits me. I'm in the point of my career that I don't need to take a job right now just for the sake of it. Sometimes in the past I did. So I want to make sure that I join an organization that I believe on, that I think synergize with what I can do as a coach, and sort of shares my vision of what is important and what is not. And I'm hopeful that I can find the right example for it. And if not, I will just keep formatting myself and go back into the next split.
Dude, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you, Jandro.
Thank you guys for having me.
Cheers.
Yeah, I feel like I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone else has too. And
absolutely,
let's check back in a year when you're writing multiple textbooks on the topic.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.
Great. Thank you.